Hey, it's time for the Point Forward podcast. We've really got to work on the branding. I'm joined by Jim Owczarski, Bucks reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. My name is JR Radcliffe. The Milwaukee Bucks, they defeat the San Antonio Spurs on Wednesday night. A star showcase, Victor Wembanyama, is in the house. He does some cool stuff, but it's the Bucks who run away with that one. Giannis and Dame flirts with a second consecutive triple-double. Khris Middleton coming off the bench. Lots to discuss. Jim, the Bucks 19-16. That's not bad. Fifth seed right now in the Eastern Conference, which is really not bad. I mean, heck, they're a game and a half out of fourth. Things should be good. The win against San Antonio, very impressive, and we'll start there. But then we're going to talk about the bad games that have come before it. Not the Toronto game per se, but just another couple kind of stumbling losses, even with all their players available. But San Antonio, a couple things happened that were interesting. First of all, the Bucks played awesome. Their defense was NBA Cup level defense. And then also Khris Middleton coming off the bench, which sounds like it's going to be something we're going to see more, pretty much regularly going forward after he had worked his way back into the starting lineup. We could start with Middleton. We could start with how they played. I'm just kind of curious what your takeaways were from this battle with the Spurs at Pfizer Forum.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more meat to the Middleton conversations. Let's just start with the game,
Sure.
Which was 2 games in a row, JR. They beat, the Spurs are not yet a lottery team. Like, they're flirting with 500. I think they'll get there eventually. But as you alluded to lose 4 games to Brooklyn, Portland, Chicago, 3 teams trying to get to the top of the lottery, like it was bad, right? And then the Bucks have turned it up defensively these last 2 games against Toronto, San Antonio, get back on the winning track, JR. Honestly, after you covered the game in Washington on the 21st, totally felt like the Bucks were going to rip off 9 in a row.
Yeah,
heading into this trip to Orlando and New York, because they should have, and they didn't. Instead they kind of dribbled down their leg a little bit, and to get right against the Raptors and Spurs, they should blow those teams out. They did blow those teams out. Good things, now they're going to play real teams. Jamal Mosley, to me, is no disrespect to Kenny Atkinson in Cleveland, but I think Jamal Mosley would get my vote for Coach of the Year, the Milwaukee native down in Orlando.
Yeah, Milwaukee native. He gets mine too, just because, that's how I roll. That's how I roll.
And then you've got a matinee at Madison Square Garden, which the Bucks are not a daytime team, in my opinion. No. And then it's a hard place to play, good team, whatever. So all good things in terms of the results, the way they've played the last couple of games. The Middleton thing's interesting, JR. Doc and Giannis, quite frankly, started to lay those breadcrumbs, after the loss to Portland, where Doc has sort of opened the door to we got to evaluate if Khris is starting and, how that works. And then Giannis was, interestingly, JR, just like, well, it's Doc's decision to start Khris. And it was like, oh, okay. Khris goes from probable to out in Toronto with tendonitis in his ankle. And then, a lot of reports, us included, have Khris sort of moving to the bench against the Spurs. And it's like, wow, okay, are they pulling the plug on this thing after just 3 starts in 7 games? And, Doc was pretty forceful, JR. This is probably the most clear the Bucks or any Bucks coach has been in my tenure on Khris Middleton injury stuff. Doc was pretty adamant in the pregame that this was a health-based decision, that Chris's ankles are not right yet, that he's still having flare-ups, that he's not moving the way he needs to all the time, and that he's still on a heavy minutes restriction that may yet decrease from the 25 he'd been playing. And so he's going to come off the bench again. So that shuts down. I had 3 or 4 trade deadline questions there. Yeah, JR, legit. Like, if this was a performance base, or we don't think this can work, that now you're getting into other conversations. So Doc, cuts that off at the knees, right? Well, then post game, Khris says it's health based, And you could tell he was not thrilled, but frustrated with minutes restriction. He doesn't feel all the way right. He sort of admitted he's not where he wants to be. Well, then Dame and Giannis, if you go read the story at jslline.com, Dame and Giannis spoke more of just, no, Khris is on the bench now. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
How that changes over a month or a couple weeks or the rest of the year, I guess, is worth watching. And maybe it is just for now. But anyway, it was that I think there's some layers there between the way Khris feels, the way Doc positioned it, and then the way the other guys view it. And not that matters. Like, it doesn't really matter what, I guess, the rest of the team thinks, like, until Khris is sort of like given the green light to play 30 to 40 minutes. I don't know what matters, right? And maybe that doesn't happen until March, and then if the team's 20 games over 500, what does anybody care? But I think right now, JR, the fact that they have no margin for error for the inevitable growing pains of the three of those guys playing together for a ton of minutes, I don't blame anyone for wanting to bring him off the bench, for thinking he should be there, for being frustrated about his situation. Like, it all kind of makes sense because there's still a team that's just frankly 3 games over 500.
Yeah, and maybe to put even a finer point on it, it feels like we're coming to the end of the Khris Middleton era. You know, if you wanted to get cynical or gloomy about it, which is my want, and
I mean, that's why you're here. That's why the people love you.
It is why the people love me. People love a gloom and doomer. They just do. I am the best at this. It's pretty easy to think, well, first of all, if it is health, he's just never. We're just not going to get old Khris Middleton back. And I guess I didn't even feel like we were, based on what you saw on the floor, we're definitely heading down that road. Yeah, there was some rust or whatever, but we've talked about before how he's come back from injury and been pretty dang effective at times. So I don't know if I was feeling that way. You know, the trade deadline is coming up, and it's easy to see scenarios if you are hunting for them where Khris Middleton, who obviously is, one of the big money makers on this team, could be dealt, but it would be weird for the coach to be itemizing all the things that are wrong with him physically and then turn around and be like, well, we got to try to find a trade partner for him. Who's going to be?
To that point, JR, I do think, and look, go over to jsonline.com. I kind of teased this last pod and last report for it, that we kind of break down all the restrictions and things the Bucks can and can't do. And you're right. Like, there's a couple weeks before the deadline, to outline a player who has a player option for next year in an economic climate in the league where I don't know why he wouldn't pick that up unless more money and more years are coming.
Yeah. And
right now, when the team that knows him best is saying he's not ready to go, look, it only takes one, but it feels like something that maybe isn't really going to be on the table until, unless these next few weeks, Khris looks just really good. And what's interesting, JR, like there has to be a performance part of this. And maybe that's what Doc meant by, like, he doesn't move as well as we need him to yet. Because when Dame and Giannis were out, Khris averaged 20.6 point rebounds, 5 assists, or vice versa in the 4 starts without him.
Yeah.
And that was just on 25 minutes a game. Like, he looked every bit the all-star, but with Dame and Giannis, we haven't seen that. And Giannis has been, I think Giannis is in that era now of he just says what he thinks and what he believes. And he's just flat out said the other day, like, it's not on purpose, but when we're starting together, the games begin in a clunky fashion, and they get stuck with one another, and the ball doesn't really move. It's a true statement. Again, though, I'd argue we should expect that because they haven't played under Doc. The problem is, if they would have started 8-2, JR, and we're now 10 games over 500, 9 games. Like, I think they could grow through it, right?
Yeah.
But when you sputter and fits and starts and you lose to crappy teams and now you're 1 game over 500, it's like, like we don't have time for this. So I think there's a little bit of both. And to loop it back to the trade stuff, I still don't think, JR, like, this team wins a championship this year without Khris Middleton. I guess a listener, reader would have to like tell me exactly who they're getting if you're going to make some kind of move for me to buy that. Like, you just look at the players available in those ranges and things. It just feels like a team that has lacked so much continuity in almost a calendar year of Doc Rivers. Why would you shuffle that all up again? And then what do we spend another 3 months with? Well, we're just learning each other. Well, we'll figure it out, right?
No,
like
that era's past. Well, and that brings me to, I love the Ringer. Zach Cram wrote this piece a couple days ago, pointing out the numbers when Giannis and Dame are available on the floor. It hasn't been awesome. It's been okay. They're obviously a top 5 team in the East right now. It hasn't been a disaster, but he points out, the bench has gotten quite a bit better. They're getting those production. There are times you've got 40% 3-point shooters coming off the bench, like AJ Green and Gary Trent, and guys have kind of figured out their roles. They're playing well, but when the stars are on the floor, things are not clicking. And now we're back to, are we sure the Dame Giannis thing is actually ever going, to work? I put in quotes again, because we're talking about a winning basketball team and a potential contender. But if those two guys aren't, elite together on the floor, then I don't know if we're talking about a potential contender, because if that doesn't work, nothing is going to work to a championship caliber level. So what did you think of that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like, the raw numbers are great. Giannis and Dame are the highest scoring duo in the league.
Sure.
I think they may have set a record or franchise record for most 30-point games by a pair of teammates last year. They'll probably pass that again this year. The idea that, they're not winning a ton with them, it's interesting. I think this is where the on-off court plus minus, while it's a useful tool, I feel like it's not indicative of how certain teams are used. Like, obviously for Nikola Jokic, it's always shown, oh my goodness, look at when they're with him, he's plus 30. When they're without him, he's minus 800. And look how valuable as well. Michael Malone doesn't play Joker with the bench. Like, Joker plays with the starters. So it's like all the starters go out when he goes out, or most of them, right? And like, they play all bench units. And so the plus minus is for Joker specifically, JR, is always out of whack, because he's not asked to play with 4 bench guys. Guess who's asked to play with 4 bench guys?
Yeah.
Giannis, Dame. And that's been part of the issue with the health of the 3, is especially with Khris missing the first 20 games. I mean, how many times did we see a Giannis, Bobby, AJ, DeLon Wright, I don't know, name a 4th guy, Pat Connaughton in the first 15 games, right? Dame in the same boat. Like they're just used differently. So I do caution the plus minus stuff. Like, yeah, would it be great if Giannis was plus 20 when he's on the court and plus 20 when he's off? I mean, there's that. Look, Giannis and Dame in particular have looked unequivocally better together than last year. And I wrote about this, how Dame has sort of had to willingly take a back seat and accept that. And I think that's where you still get some clunkiness. Like, there are times where Giannis gets into the paint and there's 4 guys around him and he's like, no, I'm going up with it. Right. So there are times where you could clearly tell Dame's like, all right, I need to get myself going here. So I think there's still, and I don't know if that's ever going to go away, because they're both such supreme scorers, JR, that they each need those times and those moments, which loops back to the Middleton thing. because Khris kind of needs that stuff too. So I think that's where maybe some of this can even out for the Bucks, at least while Khris is under this minute restriction, is just, he can facilitate some of that. So yeah, I get it. Like there are 3 games over 500. It hasn't looked awesome. Dame and Giannis are the 2 stars. Like that's where the attention's going to go. But I just feel like for those of us who watch them every day, it starts with some defensive issues. And then you look at the way they've just been deployed. They're asked to carry full bench units most of the time, or maybe Brook is in there. But again, Brook, for as much as we all love Brook and what he can bring, he's not like that sort of gravity second scorer anymore, right? So I don't know. That's just my opinion. But the results are what they are, JR. Like they're kind of a middling team. And until they're not, like these are questions that are going to be asked.
All right, I'll ask a dangerous question. Effort. If you wanted to be optimistic, you could say, because you just watched the Bucks tear apart San Antonio on national TV. You've seen the Bucks dominate the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA Cup, and nobody is beating the Oklahoma City Thunder right now. Well, Cleveland just did, but that was the first time in 15 regular season games, because the Cup game, cannot count for that, I guess, that anyone had. And then you've seen these puzzlers where they lose at home, even if they're close games down to the wire, lose at home to the Nets and the Blazers back to back. And you wonder, how is it the same basketball team? I don't think we're just not used to an inconsistent team over the past few years. The Bucks, for the most part, beat the people they should beat. They're supposed to beat. And then obviously a lot of the teams that are at their level as well. If it's possible that effort is just like, efforts, maybe I don't want it to sound like too much of a disparagement, but maybe they're just not up for these games relative to others. It can be explained by, or that can actually be a positive thing, because then they'll get to the playoffs and that switch flips. They'll be the team that they've faced, that you've seen against Oklahoma City and that you've seen against San Antonio. I'm not a big believer in the switch flipping mechanism that a lot of people invoke across sports anytime the playoffs kick into gear, but I'm willing to entertain it for this version of the Milwaukee Bucks, who know they're going to the playoffs in all likelihood, despite it not being a slam dunk like it was in past years. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when they lose 4 or 5 and to again, the Nets, Chicago, Portland, they have a loss to the Hornets, which, we can debate how they lost that game, but it's still an L.
Should not have been.
And close. So they've got losses to 4 teams in the top 10 for the lottery right now, JR. Like that's brutal. I don't care how it happened or who was available or who wasn't. Like that's not good. And
there's a pretty strong line of demarcation after these teams to the, like, then you're getting into 76ers territory and Suns territory. Like those teams have good players that are just like a hair below 500. There's only a subset of teams that are just this level of bad, like Blazers, Nets, Hornets, and they found them.
And so look, on one hand you have that. On the other hand, they went undefeated in the in-season tournament, and they won a neutral court game that doesn't count anywhere except then for a banner against the Thunder. So the Thunder game that doesn't count is clearly their best win of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Their second best win of the year is probably Houston at home, 1 point. And then Atlanta once in Vegas, maybe the hurt Magic in the in-season tournament. Probably not the Magic because they were really hurt.
And that game was bad.
So what are we talking? Like, I get the idea of them saying like, "Oh, we get up for games," but they actually haven't beat anybody that's any good,
right?
So they got up to really lose closely to the Celtics and Cavs. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like, like they got blown out by the Knicks. They got blown out by the Grizzlies. They got blown out by the Hawks when they had won 7 in a row at home when the Hawks were surging. Like they haven't beaten anybody. So. Yeah, this is not a team that can switch flip or play up or down. Like, because clearly when they play down, they will lose. And when they play up, we have yet to see them actually win any games. So I don't know. I mean, and which is why they're about 500.
Yeah.
And as Giannis said the other night, when they play their best, they can beat anyone. When they don't, they can lose to anyone. And he was like, that's unbelievable. And it's really the definition of a 500 team.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, I don't know if Paolo Banchero, as we record this, if he's going to play, if his return from a torn oblique is against the Bucks or not. If it is, it's a great emotional lift. What he can do, I don't know, but it's at home. The Magic are really feisty and a pain in the ass. That would be a good win in Orlando. If they go to New York at MSG and win that game, I'm kind of done with the close losses thing for this team.
Yeah.
I think we're way beyond that. Like those early Boston games, right? Like, wow, they were close. Now that's over with. Like,
they've got against Cleveland. That's a good loss, but the close losses don't matter anymore.
No, not anymore. Like it's 30-something game. Like they're almost halfway through the season, JR. Yeah. So go to New York and win. You know what I mean? Yeah, like then you got the Kings at home. You got the Magic again at home. You got the Raptors. So like, okay, maybe now here you rip off 7 in a row before that you get on a West Coast trip, which regardless who you play, like the Utah Portland games are bad teams, but that's a back-to-back. Mm-hmm. So, the effort, they all talk about it. It goes away. And Doc said before the Toronto game, when we asked him about it, he's like, well, I don't know what to say. Like something I'm saying is not getting through. And Dame's like, well, the coaches can only say so much. Like we've got to do it. So clearly there's a disconnect. And maybe, and I think they've been reminded at times, JR, like these losses to crappy teams is like a slap in the face. And maybe 4 out of 5 was another slap in the face. And we'll see now here going forward from here. But they are not a switch flipping team. I will not rock with that on this one. They are not good enough for that. They need the switch needs to be on from opening tip. And if it's not, then they can easily lose whatever game that is.
Before I let you go, so that you can fly to Orlando, go to Orlando for the game on Friday against between the Bucks and the Magic. Jimmy Butler, what is the percentage chance that Jimmy Butler wears a Bucks uniform at some point in 2025?
I mean, look, it's John Horst, so
anything is possible.
Nothing is ever a 0 with John, but I mean, this is pretty close. Like, Jeff Zilgett, our national reporter with USA Today Network, did not have the Bucks on the list of teams that Jimmy might end up at. I think that's an informed thing from Jeff. We'll put it that way. Other sort of tangential, Bucks or NBA folks have said Jimmy's not interested in here. Look, Jimmy wants his bag. And this kind of goes to Khris Middleton. Like Jimmy's got a $52 million player option next year. Make him obviously the 3rd highest paid player on the team. Are the Bucks really going to give him an extension to his age 38 season?
Oh man.
When you've got Giannis and Dame, they're not up. But if we're talking about next year, JR, like they're closer to up. And they could get there. It would require moving Chris and Bobby and Pat, or Chris and Brooke and Pat. And I'm not saying such things aren't impossible.
But you're losing a big that you can't afford to lose.
This is a 3-big team. The Jimmy math means you don't really have money to sign a street big. No offense to street bigs, but
that's what they call me, Jim. I'm a street big.
I don't know if there's a street big out there that's going to give you 20 and 10 when Giannis invariably misses another 9 games.
Yeah,
like Bobby can. Is Liam Robbins that guy? Like, I don't think so yet. I like Liam. He looks like an intriguing,
nice story
prospect. Again, nothing's improbable. Just John Horst. But I go with recent history, meaning since John Horst was hired from 17 to 24, JR, his biggest midseason trade, Pat Bev?
Mirotic?
Jake? I mean, maybe. Like, he's really had Tyler Zeller. Like,
Well, Jake Crowder.
He's been more of a buyout guy. Like,
Mhm.
so his moves are really done in the summer. Again, I'm not saying any, you always got to give John the magic hat, the rabbit in there.
Yeah.
It just feels so improbable from a financial standpoint and asset standpoint. And then honestly, JR, there is a locker room element here.
Of course.
Jimmy, the reason we're having this conversation is because Jimmy's doing Jimmy when he doesn't get an extension. He's literally done this in all 4 cities he's been in when they haven't given him a max. So unless the Bucks are like, yep, Jimmy Butler's the guy to age 38, to Dame to age 38. It could happen, but I really, really, really don't believe Jimmy Butler is going to be back in Milwaukee anytime soon.
He is Jim Owczarski. Read everything he has at jsonline.com. Full coverage of the Milwaukee Bucks. Thank you for joining us, Jim. We'll talk again very soon.
All right, sounds good, bud.